But it's a migrant story. Again, it's inspired by the crazy things that we've been seeing on the news and in the world. People having to flee war-torn countries with the family, absolutely no possessions, and having to take incredible risks just to see that the kids have a future, essentially. And it's about a young widowed mother who decides to leave a war-torn kingdom. There's a war going on with orcs, all my orc-like creatures, my own version of orcs, and it's her story of trying to escape and how humanity breaks down, as well as like the monsters inside the walls as well as outside the walls, I'd say. So again, that had a bit of a political leaning, and I've sort of come full circle in life, because when I first started writing, I was quite into politics, but I was big ideas, and I got told by many people that I was an idealist and things would never change and stuff like that, and you sort of slip into the sort of the apathetic mindset that they want us to have, and that so many of us have. You can't blame people for having that. But sort of last few years I've just been like, just can't stand the world anymore, and it's getting worse, so much worse, and nothing's getting only going in a worse direction. And I decided then to, because I was thinking so much about it, I really wanted to write something that I could explore the sort of things that I was frustrated with, but in a sort of, hopefully in a more constructive way.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, another great author on the show. And what I love about doing podcasts, you get to talk to people around the world. And I'm in Canada, so anytime I can talk to somebody who's not in Canada is a big bonus for me. And Richie's here on the podcast. Excited to have him on. If you like anything to do with fantasy as a writer, if as a reader you love fantasy books, you're going to love Richie. He has a podcast as well, which we're going to talk about. And he likes building community around what he's doing. So lots of great stuff to chat about, as well as a new book coming out in March. So excited to have Richie here. Richie, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Dave.
It's great. Now, if you hear that accent, I know, Richie, I don't have an accent as a Canadian. You can smile at me now. Yes, right. Yeah. I don't have an accent, but you have an amazing accent. I love it. Can you tell everybody where you are in this big world of ours?
Yeah, I am in Liverpool in the UK. It's probably most well known for the Beatles, but if you're a soccer fan, probably know Liverpool Football Club as well. Probably don't know the lesser known football club, which is the one I support, Everton. And so yeah, that's probably what it's known for. Yeah,
there's that famous picture of Abbey Road with the Beatles, and you see the 4 band members walking across the road. But I always tell people, if you look at that photo carefully, there's actually 5 Beatles. In that picture, there's actually a Volkswagen Beetle parked on the side of the road. So there's technically 5 Beatles in that photo. So on Abbey Road. So
it's quite
next time you're looking, go check it out.
It's quite a funny story about Abbey Road. So Abbey Road is not in Liverpool, funny enough. And this guy, I was walking along Penny Lane, funny enough at the time.
There you go.
And this guy pulled up alongside me, and he was like, "Oh, what's so special about Penny Lane?" And I was like, "It's nothing really. It's just a street, and there's like a sign that the Beatles all signed, which you can go and have a look at." And I was like, just pointed that out to him, and he's like, "So where's Abbey Road?" And he was from London himself. And I was like, "Nah, not here. We're far away from Abbey Road."
There you go. Amazing. So do you love music, Richie? Are you a music guy?
I do love music, yeah. It took me a while to get into the Beatles, though, funny enough. I think it's because you're from Liverpool, everyone goes on about the Beatles, and then you're like, I'm one of them people with everyone's like flocking one direction. I'll go and see what's happening on the other side. Yeah. But I do love music, love classic rock. Allman Brothers. I mean, you're from Canada, and Neil Young's one of my favourites.
Oh, so I had his brother, Bob Young, on
No
my
way.
podcast.
Oh my God.
So it was the coolest thing ever because he wrote a book around somebody who plays golf, blah, blah, blah. But I got a chance to talk to Neil's brother. What a great guy. Like, he told me stories about Neil growing up. It was so cool. So there you go. So you never know who you're going to talk to on a podcast.
Did you get put a word in to try and get Neil on the show?
I would love. They don't like to do interviews. Those guys do not like it. So, but it was really kind of cool.
Unless he's ranting about something.
Yeah. So we are the new media, right? We can get access to these amazing people. They don't want to talk to anybody in the news, but you and I come up with a podcast. They're like, sure, I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's so cool.
I know. It's very liberating.
Right. So on that, you have a podcast. Tell everybody about your show. How long have you have you had the podcast?
It's called the Fantasy Writers Toolshed, and it's been going for a good few years. I was going to stop it. I used to do it with a guy called Justin, and we did it for a while together, but he had to take a step back. We were getting too busy with work and stuff. So I was like, I might leave it. But too many people were listening to it, so I was like, just try it, carry on. And it's been amazing since, because I was like, I can't do this on my own. So no one can understand this accent for half an hour. So I had just went out and just looked for guests, and it was quite interesting what you say about how new media sort of breaks down barriers, because when you start, I mean, I'm someone who suffers tremendously with imposter syndrome. So I'm approaching like best-selling authors who I admire and look up to, and like begging that they even look at the email. But they just come back to you just like perfectly normal people. And just like, yeah, I'd be delighted to go on the show. And then all of a sudden you sort of interviewing like these amazing people who you respect and admire. And it's like best-selling authors, like international bestsellers. Like I had the biggest, the fastest-selling author and one of the biggest-selling authors in India. And I didn't know anything about him, but he's like the equivalent of like Tolkien, but for India. And and a former FBI agent. He was amazing. He came on. He's like an international expert on body language. And I just try
the whole time while he's talking, are you thinking, is he looking at me? Like, is he figuring me out?
It's just so perfectly still the whole time. But literally at the end, as he asked me when the episode was coming out, and I scratched the back of my neck, and he was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Nothing's wrong. Well, what are you asking that for?" He was like, "Well, you scratched the back of your neck, so that means you're worried about something." I was like, Jesus Christ, Joe, I'd be a nightmare. You know,
Here I am scratching the back of my neck now because I feel like, wow, that's amazing, right?
Yeah, but it's like a superpower. So I thought that would be quite interesting for writers. It's all tied to writing. So I have historians on talking about medieval history, psychologists talking about characters, and sociologists. So yeah, it's brilliant what you can do, because like you say, you're empowered to do whatever you want, and as long as people like and appreciate it, then it's all worthwhile.
Yeah, I think podcasting can be the most selfish thing you can do. Like, you could just get people on because you want to meet them. If somebody listens, great. Obviously that we want people to listen to our show, but the chance to talk to somebody that I admire simply because I have a show, like, I'm going to use that as much as possible.
Yeah.
I had the original writer on my show from Inspector Gadget.
Nice.
It was a children's TV show back in the day, a long time ago, and he's the original writer. Wrote every episode. I'm like, he came on my show, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is so cool to have somebody that I used to watch your show when I was a little kid, and now here you are, I get to talk to you. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Who you can talk to with a podcast.
I know. I was like thinking something along them lines. Like, I wonder if I could just manufacture a way just to interview the last surviving members of the Allman Brothers.
Ooh.
I was like,
why not, right?
A podcast about the Allman Brothers.
Yeah.
You know?
Chase them down. You never know, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen if you don't ask.
But I think this ties into basically like where I started writing is crazy. Like, we're looking back, because I was terrified to do all of these things that, like, even just being on a podcast chatting to you now, like I say, I do suffer from imposter syndrome. It's in a bit of a box now, but it does get out every now and then. And I think a lot of people, a lot of writers especially, like, they have this fear that they can't do it, they're not good enough, they don't want to fail. And then this sort of negative voice just sort of talks you into not doing anything, and you just don't try. And podcasting, like, I don't know anything about podcasting, let's be honest. I know a bit more than what I did when I started out, but you just got to try these things. And like, even though it's podcasting, it's audio, it's the sort of mental discipline that you need to write. You need to sort of push yourself to take a chance and to I don't know, tell stories that you're interested in, and without sort of worrying about what other people think and stuff like that. So it all ties in.
So, Richie, for somebody who's an author, they're early in their journey to write a book, but they're struggling with that imposter syndrome. Like, who's ever going to read my book? Who cares what I have to say? Based on your experience and kind of how you are working through it yourself, any words of wisdom to somebody who's really scared to put their words on paper and put it out into the world?
I think you do just have to take the jump, because I was thinking about this today, because I'm writing a script for a podcast episode that I decided to do on my own for Christmas, and it's a summary basically of all the best writing tips I've learned in 2024. And one of them is basically a reflection on what has become sort of more evidence to me this year than ever before. And it's basically that you can't do it on your own. You've got to get help from other people. And whether it's like help with editing or getting a book cover done or whatever, you need the sort of, it's just necessary essentially, and it gives you confidence as well, especially like working with other writers to improve what you've created and to point out the things that you're not so good at, because let's be honest, we need that honest feedback, and as long as you open your mind to the criticisms and the reality that you're not Charles Dickens, then
right,
then you've got nothing to stop you really. And I think that is really important when you're starting out. You've just got to basically open your heart up to a bit of hurt, work with other people as much as you can, and that's why I created the community, because when I started out, there was nothing. There was nowhere you could go. You could maybe go on forums, you could try Reddit. I mean, some brilliant people on Reddit, but I mean, if you're worried about sharing your stuff online, then you're not going to go to Reddit. There was a few Facebook groups before Facebook groups went weird and a bit useless. And that's probably 2 years ago now when I set up. It was a Facebook group, and I just found that people weren't able to engage on the human level almost, because there's this wall commenting on things, and it's not like a back and forth as like a normal conversation would. And then I sort of started trying Discord, which is, if anyone's unfamiliar with Discord, it's just like an instant messaging platform. But you can create communities called servers and then break up them communities into like different subjects and stuff like that. So I created that stuff you couldn't do on Facebook, for example, and then created spaces for like where people could share requests for beta reading if they've got a story or chapter they wanted to get feedback on. And then loads of people started joining, and I think there's about 600 people at the moment. Wow. And probably like a year ago, the sort of beta groups evolved into critique groups where people were just like, we want more feedback. We're getting so much benefit out of this. We need to make it more regular. And you probably hear like a lot of good teachers on writing talking about how useful writing groups can be. I think Brandon Sanderson, he's like a really good fantasy author, brilliant teacher of writing as well. and he's in a weekly writing group, and he gets constant feedback from other writers, and you get that honest, sort of brutal insight into of what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, so that you can fix it, understand where your weaknesses are, and then that's how you really do improve. So them critique groups, I think there's like 11 or 12 now, and some of them have met every week for over a year. 4 or 5 people meeting up, and I think that was brilliant because I didn't organise anything there. That just happened organically. That was just people getting together in that environment and saying, this is what we want to do, who's up for it, and then loads of people were interested. People volunteered to organise it, so it was amazing, yeah, and it really worked. So it's really worked for them. Loads of them have put books out. Some people are getting like short stories published regularly, and they've all, I don't think anyone has turned around and said that the writing hasn't got better. And I think that's what the biggest sort of step you can take if you really want to commit to writing and get better at your craft. Just deciding to work with other people. It's a big thing.
So we have, are you still accepting new people into your communities? Like, people can come and join?
I'll share the link with you and anyone can sign up and
we'll
join.
Put it in the notes. Good. Yeah. Because I think that's one thing that a lot of the authors I talk to, they do feel like they're on their own. They're wrestling with their imposter syndrome. They have nobody to talk to. They're trying to stay motivated to write all by themselves. There's nobody in the corner going, hey, Richie, did you write today? There's nobody there for them. And they give up or they delay, and it takes forever to write this book. But being in a community, at least there's somebody there kind of going, hey, how are things? Are you good? Can you read my chapter? Because I'd like to get some feedback. I'll read your chapter. That kind of back and forth, I think, helps people to be a little more accountable to their dream of writing their book. Just knowing there's someone else there that's going, hey, Richie, are you good? Like, are things good? Yeah, good. Okay. Like, just having that, I think, is better than to write on your own and be in your own little world and try to stay motivated. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, especially with everything that life's got to throw at you, like your 9 to 5 and everything else. So, yeah, it's tough. And just having other people who are on a sort of same interests as you, maybe writing the similar kind of thing, just want to bounce ideas off, talk through things. If you've got a little question nagging you, I think so. Pick you up when you're feeling down.
Yeah. So, Richie, talk to us about your books, too. We have a lot of readers that are listening to the podcast. They may or may not ever write their own book, but they're looking to fall in love with an author, and you have a lot to offer with all the amount of books you have out there and short stories and all kinds of great stuff. Talk a little bit about your world of all the things you're writing, and we're going to talk about something coming up in March, but kind of take us back a little bit into some of the things you've written in the past. Well, how would you describe your books to a new reader so that we know if this is the book for us or not?
Yeah, it's always quite hard, isn't it? And trying to give yourself a précis. But I think my writing has definitely changed over the years. Hopefully, it's got better. But I think the types of things have always been the same. So I am sort of motivated by injustices. I think that's kind of why I was drawn to law. I used to be a lawyer. And then I'm also quite interested in politics as well, quite related. Talk about that in a little bit, though. And I think around the time when growing up, I absolutely adored fantasy books. Like, I think I was 11 when the first Lord of the Rings film came out on the cinema. Mm-hmm. I read The Hobbit when I was around the same age, and then Harry Potter mania as well. So I was always living in a sort of different world, and went to university and stuff like that. Started reading law books and drinking alcohol. So all the pleasure reading fell away. But when I was working as a lawyer, I was getting quite down. I was like, oh, this is life now. This is me. Yeah. 9 to 5 at a desk, listening to Susan moan about a compensation. So, yeah, I was like, ah. And then I had a look at it was quite lucky actually because I had a boss who was really into fantasy books, like way more than I was. Like he knew all of these fantasy books that I've never heard of, and he put me onto like Raymond Feist, James Barclay. And I just got the spark back. Absolutely loved it. I was blown away by these books, and I was obviously going through quite a tough time myself as well. Just working out what the hell life was about and stuff. And I got so much satisfaction out of these books and the escapism that they provided me. I was like, this is like an amazing thing that they've given me, and I kind of want to do the same. I've always enjoyed writing and stuff like that. So gave it a go and fell in love. So I tended to always write fantasy because that was the first love. It's my childhood crush.
So is there a starting point for a new reader for your books? Where should they go back to book one? Where should they start as a new reader?
So I started out writing a lot of short stories, and if any writers listening, I always recommend when you're starting out, practicing your craft and sharpening your skills. Short stories are a great place to start because nice quick projects, and there's a lot you can do with short stories. So I've got a couple of short story collections. One's about fantasy, one's more literary. Because that's what I'd write any story that pops into my head, and I tend to write, say, about 60-70% fantasy, but then I just call it literary because it's always got that literary flair, but it'll sort of mix genres like magical realism, historical fiction, horror, and stuff like that. So I just finished the story, which is a bit like, it's inspired by the life of Pi, but it's about Gaza and all the horrific things going on there. And that's just like, if there's something that sort of motivates me in a way, I'll write it. But I've got a novel as well, which is a fantasy novel. That isn't set in the world that I've created. I called it Pariah, and that's where all of my fantasy stories take place. But this novel is not set there. It was done for a publisher. It was almost like a commission. And I like the idea of the project because it was a shared universe, so shared world. So lots of different authors all create their own stories, but they all interlink and take place within that sort of world. So I like the idea. I thought it was really cool. I applied and wrote the novel, and that was that. But it's a good story if you like underdog stories, and it's fantasy, loads of big action scenes and characters doing what the world doesn't expect them to do. And since then, I've just been working on another fantasy novel, which is set in my world of Pariah. And this is just sort of classic fantasy novel. Good versus evil. What is evil? What is good? And sort of exploring that through the characters in a fantasy story, essentially. But it's a migrant story. Again, it's inspired by the crazy things that we've been seeing on the news and in the world. People having to flee war-torn countries with the family, absolutely no possessions, and having to take incredible risks just to see that the kids have a future, essentially. And it's about a young widowed mother who decides to leave a war-torn kingdom. There's a war going on with orcs, all my orc-like creatures, my own version of orcs. And it's her story of trying to escape and how humanity breaks down, as well as like the monsters inside the walls as well as outside the walls, let's say. So again, that had a bit of a political leaning, and I've sort of come full circle in life, because when I first started writing, I was quite into politics. But I was big ideas, and I got told by many people that I was an idealist and things would never change and stuff like that. And you sort of slip into the sort of the apathetic mindset that they want us to have, and that so many of us have. You can't blame people for having that. But sort of last few years, I've just been like, just can't stand the world anymore. And it's getting worse, so much worse, and nothing's getting only going in a worse direction. And I decided then to, because I was thinking so much about it, I really wanted to write something that I could explore the sort of things that I was frustrated with, but in a sort of, hopefully in a more constructive way. But it is essentially a story about a revolution against the corrupt capitalist government, just in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
So that comes out in
Something
March.
that I think no matter where you live, wherever country you're in, you're going to have a similar struggle with what's going on politically and where you live. I think there's a lot of people who could resonate with that and go, "Oh, I know what you're talking about, Richard. Richie, I love having a book like this to take me away and make me think of things in a different way." So I like that you're writing about stuff like this. This is good.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I just feel really helpless a lot of the time. Like, we are literally trapped in this bloody system. Like, what can we do to get out of it? We can't really, unless you go off the grid, which, let's be honest, is not a really a choice for many of us. But I wanted to create a story, basically, that was like, right, we don't have to accept it. This is a story about fighting against it and showing people, reminding people that all the power is in you. It's you've got the ability to shape the world around you and the world as you want it to be. And the people in power, they think the same, and they're just doing it. We're not. So there's more of us than them. So
that's the complete opposite, Richie, of your struggle with your imposter syndrome. You just said you have the power in you to make change. You can do something in your world. But as an imposter, you feel like an imposter, you just feel so held back that you don't feel like you have the power in you, that you don't have a voice. Nobody cares. You can't make a difference. Like, it's the complete opposite of what you're writing about. So is this kind of how you're dealing with your own internal struggle to find your place?
Yeah, I think it certainly is. And it's sort of that struggle. It's like I think it echoes what a lot of people face. It's like some days that imposter syndrome speaks louder than the sort of defiant voice that we all want. But it's I don't know. I think it's important to feel a bit of imposter syndrome from time to time, just to keep you grounded. I think there's like, I was speaking to Jennifer Armentrout on the podcast, and she's an international bestseller, and I just asked her, do you ever get imposter syndrome? She's like, all the time. All the time. And I always wonder why so many authors experience it, and this is the reason what I put it down to is my sort of background and upbringing, and coming from more of a working class background where you're told you can't do things or you're not good enough to do things, which was the same as her. Like, she like didn't have enough money to buy books growing up, so they'd have to go to the library, and other kids would laugh at them and stuff like that. So it does shape kinds of things that matter to you in life, and influences what you're interested in, I think, down the line. And I kind of feel everything's come full circle back to sort of this sort of sense of injustice again. And it's getting so much worse, and I just needed a way to vent, to process, and hopefully enable other people to do the same. And one of the inspirations for the sort of approach I took with this book was a lot of classic philosophy. I don't know, there doesn't seem to be a lot of philosophy, or like contemporary philosophy, around anymore. And we do tend to drift back towards the sort of classics, Plato and Socrates and all them. But I did come across Epicurus, and what I liked about Epicurus is that he focused on what it means to be happy and not what it means to be good, and everyone scorned him for that. But he was probably the most successful philosopher of them all. He had hundreds of thousands of followers in the Mediterranean. People lived in communes inspired by his teachings. And it's the sort of early influence of Marxism, I suppose, because his idea was about community and egalitarianism and just living a happy sort of life, not sort of driven by material needs and wants and desires and stuff like that, and to focus on friendships, and because they're the things that truly make us happy and satisfied and stuff like that. And the way they sort of discuss these things is through what they call dialogues, which is just conversations basically with a few different people, but it's like written like a story. And I really loved that sort of idea of characters having conversations about sort of the topics that sort of matter to me, like capitalism and the way things are structured, why things are unfair, the impact they have on wider society. And I sort of decided to take that and put it in, like try and mix it with a bit of a fantasy story in the middle of a revolution. And it's quite a fast-paced story. So the revolution takes place over the course of a day. And I was keen to showcase like so many different perspectives. I don't know if you've ever seen The Wire.
Yeah. You love that show.
Oh, it's fantastic. And one of the reasons I love it is because it looks at the issue of the war on drugs from lots of different perspectives and shows the impact it's had. And that way you get a more complete picture. And that's what I wanted to do here. I wanted to show the impact of this sort of corrupt capitalist system and the impact it's had on everybody in society. And so it's good. You've got like the obviously working class people, drug dealers. They give the economic perspective in the story, as I think they're the sort of ugly face of capitalism. And we've got the kids, the victims essentially. Police, what it's like to enforce these corrupt laws and stuff like that, and then the sort of older people in society, and it's I think that's the best way to sort of tackle a subject, I think. Using different perspectives, and then each sort of character takes the story to a certain point, and then it passes on to the next character. So it's 8 parts, and it's only a short book. So if you've got a short attention span, then you won't be reading it for too long.
Do you find, Richie, that your legal background comes into your writing at all? Do you kind of see elements of that as you write your book?
I have got a few characters. I'm not in this story, but saying that, it is the second chapter in the story. It's quite heavily influenced by my legal background, because I've got a trade union working class character, the trade union man. So he's like a steward. I think that's what they call them. And he's sort of fighting against like a ruthless employer who's trying to remove all kinds of working rights. And then he's trying to sort of fight that and also please or keep the union on board, essentially. But he gets enlisted to help in the revolution and to basically spark the workers into protest. And then that's the sort of the flame that hits the kindling then to spark the revolution. But yeah, it's quite interesting because there's a nasty accident at work, or fatal accident at work, that happens in that, and that's what I used to do. I used to do accident at work claims.
See, there you go.
Yeah, so that was one way. But I do think the sort of injustice Like I really hate people being wronged and done over. Liverpool as a city has kind of faced a lot of injustices over the years, especially in recent times from the government and conservative governments, Margaret Thatcher and all. So that's sort of inbred in you as well. And also I'm Irish, so so the injustice runs deep.
There you go. Yeah, I just think with all that legal knowledge and background and study, that's a piece of you. I don't think you can just shut that off like a light. That's a piece of you that I think would filter into your writing to some degree. Because to get to the part where you can be a lawyer, you have a long journey that many people would never take. They could never do what you've done. So I just imagine some of that's going to filter its way somehow into how you write and into your characters over time.
Yeah. And I also used to run an Irish pub, so that's definitely filtered through to some characters.
Some interesting stories behind the bar, for sure. Yeah. I love it. So the new book that's coming out in March, can you tell us more about what we can look forward to, Richie? What's coming?
Yeah, so it's called Together We Rise. It's like I say, it's about this revolution. If you like a sort of grittier style, that's probably what this is going to be. There's like swearing. There's quite a lot of, not a lot of violence, but I don't like pull any punches with the descriptions. I don't go over the top, you know what I mean? But I don't pull any punches. And like, all these characters are people who have been done over in some way or another. And so if you feel like you've been wronged in some way, you might be able to relate. There's a lot of different characters, a lot of different backgrounds, but they all share one thing in common. And the main sort of story is sort of built around a single character, and she's called Talia. And after sort of finished the novel that I've mentioned before, she was what was left of another novel that I gutted to use as content for that novel, and she was the best part of it. She was the best part of the story. And her story essentially is, she's the daughter of a blacksmith, but in a roundabout way, she gets sort of swooned by this guy who's the captain of the local police in the city, and it turns out he's a horrible bastard. So she ends up marrying him, and he kills her father, she discovers, and then he starts abusing her, raping her and stuff like that, and she just sort of falls into like a black hole of despair, and then in a roundabout way she becomes a vigilante. She sort of comes across a woman being raped by another police officer, and it triggers her, and she kills this police officer and feels amazing. She feels alive. She feels like she's powerful again. She's got control. All of the things that were taken away from her for so long. And she becomes a sort of vigilante, and she starts going around killing corrupt police officers and like drug dealers and stuff like that, and starts like a bit of a gang and develops a reputation as Shadow. That's what everyone calls her. But she realizes it's not enough, like, to change the world. You can't just go around killing everyone. There needs to be like a fundamental shift, and she starts planning a revolution. And the story is just the day of the revolution. So that is all backstory that I've mentioned. You find that out in the story, but it starts on the morning of the revolution, and I just sort of, I don't want to tell you everything that's going to happen. I'm just going to reveal it in bit by bit, and you'll see it through the character's eyes as it's all unfolding. And that's what I like to do. I like to sort of throw you in, intrigue you. Lots of action. And it all comes back to Talia. but it doesn't sound like a fantasy story because it is just set in a secondary world. Like I say, this world of Pariah that I created. But the last chapter, it sort of brings it all back around in a big fantastical way. So I mentioned that I like to explore what good and evil is. I do have my sort of own theory that I use to sort of build everything around, and basically that it's two forces, good and evil, and they're just this evil's hunting down any sort of good, and the sort of what I sort of see these things as evil is nothingness. It's basically the antithesis to life. It's just not, just empty void, and good is life essentially, because what's the opposite of nothing? So, and it's just like an endless battle, and the battle is waged in every living thing, encouraging things to do bad things and encouraging things to do good things, and that's the kind of struggle that I explore on a more sort of character-based level. And we've got forces, a force of good and a force of evil, who represent these two sides, and they're sort of fighting an invisible war. And sometimes that war spills into the reality here, is because what has happened in this particular case is one of the forces of evil, and they're called the Pariah, and they're a bit like Slender Men. That's the best way to describe them. They've infiltrated the leadership of this city and have turned it into a dictatorship, and have slowly corrupted it into this horrible mess. And in this last chapter, you realise what's been going on, and what is actually happening on a grander scale. This sort of battle between the forces of life and the forces of nothingness. And then that's a bit of a hook then to the wider fantasy world and things to come. Probably explain that really badly.
I think that's lots. That's going to help us as a reader to know, oh, this is the right book for me. This is the right book for my friends. I know what they love to read. So hearing it from the voice of the author, I think, is always really fun as a reader. Because now when we pick up your book, Richie, we're going to be so excited to see what you have for us as we follow these characters through their stories. I love it. Take us to your website, Richie. Where do we go to follow up? We're going to follow and wait for the book in March, but to get all of your short stories, I'm on your website. It's beautiful, by the way. Short stories, the link for your podcast is there. You've got writing tips for people and tools, all kinds of great stuff, and your community. Where do we go for your website? Where do we have to go?
Yeah, just go to richiebilling.com. It's Billing, and Richie doesn't have a T. Some people like to throw a T in. I don't know where that came from, but people just throw T in.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Richie, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Congratulations in advance for your new book in March. We're recording this in December, but March is going to right around the corner, so I'm excited for you. And one thing I love, for those that are listening in audio, you don't get to see what I get to see, but Richie has this big smile when he talks about his book, and he talks about his characters, and you can tell that Richie's really excited about this book coming out, and I can see that you're proud of what you've done. So in that sense of being proud of your work, Richie, I hope that fights a little bit against any form of imposter syndrome, because you've done something that many people would love to do. Not only written one book, many books. You help authors. You have a podcast. You have a community. So you just keep pouring into people, and I'm sure good things are coming to you in the future just by doing that. And again, you got away from the desk job and Susan complaining about her wages. Now you're doing something you'd much rather do, share stories and write about your characters. I can see it in your face that this really lights you up. So I love when somebody finds their path. And we're not going to make $1 million maybe by doing it, but we're doing something we love. So it's great, Richie. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Dave. That's very kind of you to say. And if I've got time for one more writing tip, this is one that I learned recently from Ian Rankin, and it ties in perfectly what you said just then. And it's to write what interests you. Don't worry about what's selling, winning all the awards. Just write what interests you.
There you go. There you go. And don't be shy to share your story. The only person who can write your book is you. The only one who could podcast is you. The only one who's lived your life is you. So no one else can do what you do. So Richie, to that end, thank you for doing what you do for your readers. It's great.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to you as well.
Thanks for checking out Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have you here. And here at the end, I want to just put this shout out to authors listening. If you want to sell more books, if you want to build community, one of the best ways you can do that is by guesting on podcasts and or having your own podcast. So I have a podcast called the How to Podcast series, and I help people start podcasts. I also do editing. I also help with social media, website design. I do all those things in addition to being the host of this podcast and the 6 other podcasts that I do, including How to Podcast series. I think you would be the perfect person to start a podcast. I would love to help you. Head over to howtopodcast.ca, howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know if you're interested in starting a podcast, and I want to work with you. Thanks for listening to Living the Next Chapter. Catch you on the next one. Take care.